Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Red 1 in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Red 1. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Red 1 is a 2024 American action-adventure Christmas fantasy comedy film directed by Jake Kasdan and written by Chris Morgan, from an original story by Hiram Garcia. The film follows the head of North Pole Security, Dwayne Johnson, teaming up with a notorious hacker, Chris Evans, in order to locate a kidnapped Santa Claus, J.K. Simmons, on Christmas Eve. Lucy Liu, Kiernan Shipka, Bonnie Hunt, Nick Kroll, Christopher Hivju, and Wesley Kimmel also star. The film is seen as the first of a Christmas-themed franchise produced by Amazon MGM Studios in association with Seven Bucks Productions, Chris Morgan Productions, and the Detective Agency. Red 1 was released internationally by Warner Bros. Pictures on November 6th and was released in the United States by Amazon MGM Studios through Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer on November 15, 2024. The film received mixed to negative reviews from critics. Plot: MORA, Mythological Oversight and Restoration Authority, is a clandestine, multilateral military organization that oversees and protects a secret peace treaty between mythological creatures and humanity. Callum Drift, head commander of Santa Claus's ELF, Enforcement Logistics and Fortification Security, requests to retire after one last Christmas run, as he has become disillusioned with increased bad behavior in the world, exemplified by the growth of Santa's naughty list. On Christmas Eve, a Black Ops team breaks into the North Pole complex and kidnaps Santa. Callum notifies director Zoe Harlow about the kidnapping, and her team discovers that the North Pole's secret location was compromised by Jack O'Malley, a mercenary black hat hacker who claims to be able to find anything in the world. Zoe has Jack apprehended for questioning, but Jack, a lifelong Santa debunker, did not know the information he hacked was related to Santa, and merely sent said information to an anonymous buyer. Zoe offers to double Jack's payment if he helps them find Santa, but places a tracker inside him. Callum reluctantly teams up with Jack to find Santa, first by tracking down the broker who arranged the deal between Jack and the kidnapper in Aruba. The broker tells them that the kidnapper is the winter witch, Grilla. Grilla becomes aware of their conversation and sends her snowmen to eliminate them. Though Callum and Jack defeat them, the broker is iced in the scuffle. Callum suspects that Grilla might be working with Krampus, Santa's estranged adoptive brother, who is also Grilla's ex-lover and the one who created the naughty list. Callum and Jack break into Krampus's lair but are captured. Callum appeals to Krampus to help his brother, who misses him, but Krampus refuses. Despite being allowed to leave, Jack stays and persuades Krampus to play Krampusschlap with Callum, during which Jack recovers Callum's magic gauntlet and returns it to him, allowing the pair to escape. Grilla and her sons have Santa kept in a vault that siphons his magic, knocking him unconscious. Grilla duplicates the Glaskafig, a magical imprisoning snow globe, and intends to rid the world of every naughty child who has ever been on the naughty list by imprisoning them forever. She tests the snow globes on Jack and his estranged son Dylan. She sends each of them a snow globe that imprisons them and returns to her lair. Jack and Dylan, inside their snow globes next to each other, have a heartfelt conversation that, by making them nicer, causes the snow globes to break and free them. Using the tracker in Jack, Zoe and Callum find Jack at the North Pole complex, realizing that Grilla, her team, and Santa never left the North Pole. They also learn that the complex is taken over by Grilla's team of shapeshifters. They go to the North Pole and free the imprisoned Mrs. Claus and other security staff. In Santa's old workshop, they find Jack and Dylan and the toy duplicating equipment that Grilla used to mass-produce the snow globes. Because the North Pole equipment relies on Santa's powers, Grilla prepares to leave with an unconscious Santa using his sleigh to distribute the snow globes. A fight ensues and Grilla is stopped by Callum and Jack, with an assist from Krampus, who arrives to help. Santa recovers and acknowledges his brother while Grilla is sealed inside one of her snow globes and turned over to Zoe's custody. With Grilla defeated, everyone rapidly prepares for the night's Christmas Eve run. Santa invites Jack and Dylan to accompany him, which they accept. During the successful run, Callum watches Jack regain his wonder and build a relationship with Dylan. This convinces him not to retire. Cast Dwayne Johnson as Callum Drift, head of North Pole security for St. Nicholas. Chris Evans as Jack O'Malley, a hacker and bounty hunter. Wyatt Hunt as Child Jack, Lucy Liu as Zoe Harlow, J.K. Simmons as Nick, Kiernan Shipka as Grilla, Bonnie Hunt as Mrs. Claus, Reynaldo Fabril as the voice of Agent Garcia, 10, an anthropomorphic polar bear agent, Christopher Hivju as Krampus, Nick Kroll as Ted, Wesley Kimmel as Dylan, Jack's son, Mary Elizabeth Ellis as Olivia, Jack's ex-partner, Mark Evan Jackson as Uncle Rick, Jenna Cannell as Krampus guest, Gershon Arya as Draco. Production, Hiram Garcia at 7 Bucks Productions conceived the idea for the film, which was developed into a screenplay by Chris Morgan for Jake Kasdan to direct. Chris Evans joined the cast in January 2022. In September 2022, Kiernan Shipka was added to the cast. Lucy Liu, Mary Elizabeth Ellis, J.K. Simmons, Nick Kroll, Christopher Hivju, Wesley Kimmel, and Bonnie Hunt joined the cast the following month, with Ellis revealing her and Simmons' involvement on Instagram. Dwayne Johnson was paid $50 million for his involvement. Filming began in October 2022 in Atlanta and wrapped in February 2023. Filming ran into issues with Johnson, who was an average of 7 to 8 hours late to film his scenes and missed several days of shooting. These delays reportedly increased the budget by $50 million to a total of $250 million, which Garcia disputed. Johnson later admitted to frequent tardiness as well as urinating in bottles on set, but Evans and Kasdan defended him. Release: Red One was originally scheduled to be released on Prime Video worldwide in time for Christmas 2023. The release was delayed from December 20, 2023 until November 15, 2024, with the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike cited as the reason, along with the film now getting a worldwide theatrical release. Johnson pushed for Red One to be released in IMAX after watching an IMAX screening of Oppenheimer while Red One's principal photography was still underway. Johnson thought that Red One in the IMAX format would be game over. Amazon MGM will distribute it in the United States, while Warner Bros. Pictures will handle the film's international release. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, it was released on November 6, 2024. In Latin America, it was released on November 7, 2024, with pre-release advance screenings starting October 31, 2024. Footage of Red One was first shown at CinemaCon in April 2024 to journalists selected by Johnson's publicist, but they were not allowed to write about what they saw. Reception: Box office. As of November 18, 2024, Red One has grossed $33.8 million in the United States and Canada and $51.1 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $84.9 million. In the United States and Canada, Red One was projected to gross $35 million from 4,032 theaters, with some independent sources predicting a debut as low as $25 million or as high as $40 million. The film made $10.9 million on its first day, including $3.7 million from Sunday and Thursday night previews. It went on to debut to $32.1 million, topping the box office. Speaking on its opening, Variety concluded that it'll take a Christmas miracle for Red One to become a profitable hit at the box office, but noted that streamers like Amazon, Apple, and Netflix don't necessarily need their films to be successful in theaters to be considered a success, citing 2023's Killers of the Flower Moon, which debuted to $23 million against a $200 million budget, but later became a hit on Apple TV+. Critical response: on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 33% of 132 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 4.4/10. The website's consensus reads, "Wrapped in slick packaging but wholly lacking in holiday magic, Red One is a ho-ho-hum action-adventure." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 34 out of 100, based on 35 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale, while those polled by PostTrack gave it a 78% overall positive score, with 57% saying they would definitely recommend it. Peter Bradshaw, writing for The Guardian, gave the film 1 star out of 5, describing it as profoundly depressing and blandly sentimental, and concluding, "This commercial and formulaic slice of content is a toy destined to be forgotten, not by Boxing Day, but mid-November." Glenn Garner of Deadline Hollywood said the film blends genres for some family-friendly holiday fun with a generous dose of self-aware absurdity, and wrote, "Yes, it's cheesy, but this movie is best when it leans heavily into the cheese." If that makes your eyes roll, keep in mind this is a Christmas movie ultimately intended for kids who've made it all the way through the MCU on Disney Plus twice and their parents now need a reprieve. There are still some jokes aimed at the cold-hearted adult who will inevitably be dragged along on the family cinema outing. It is starting to feel a bit more like the holiday season. A bit. At last, we have a high-concept film with a Christmas theme aimed at the masses, a couple well-known stars headlining with an idea aimed at children but targeting slightly older moviegoers with action. That does not mean we have our first holiday blockbuster on our hands. In fact, Amazon's foray with MGM into the movie business is not going to go as well as the packages they will be delivering to spread Christmas cheer, because Red One is down indeed. So the latest collaboration between Jake Kasdan and Dwayne Johnson, not to mention screenwriters who have worked on many films for Johnson, and even co-star Chris Evans, is not a hit with critics. Move on from that unpleasantness, and Amazon is still left with an opening that is the 18th best of 2024 to date, barely ahead of John Krasinski's It's Squattisef, if with $30.7 million if the estimates hold, but just barely in the top 10 of Dwayne Johnson's career as a headliner. The infamous Black Adam just happens to be number 1, and the Jumanji films are his toppers, but Red One's $34 million edged out the pandemic-era release of Jungle Cruise, which earned just a hair over $30 million. Maybe audiences thought Red One was actually going to be streaming on Amazon Prime as it was originally planned, but this is an Apple-level, what were they thinking kind of budget in search of a global payday. Amazon and MGM reportedly spent $200 to $250 million on Red One, just as Netflix doled out $200 million for Red Notice and The Gray Man. At least Red One was released in theaters. Unless somehow audiences don't flock away from this to Wicked, Gladiator 2, and Moana 2 in the next 2 weeks, Red One's final domestic gross could join a particular naughty list of films with a budget that high that failed to gross $100 million. Only 2 films to date have opened higher than Red One in the month of November and failed to reach that mark, and they were Dumb and Dumber 2, $36.1 million, $86.1 million, and last year's The Marvels, $46 million, $84.4 million. The next films on that list are Immortals, $32.2 million, $83.5 million, and the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, $32 million, $85.4 million. An unlucky 13 currently reside on that $200+ million budget, less than $100 million gross list, 2 of which were caught in the pandemic, Tenet and Wonder Woman 1984, while 5 of the other 11 have been released in the last 13 months. The Marvels, Argylle, Napoleon, Wish, and Killers of the Flower Moon. Red One is making a bit of it back, again, a bit. Thanks to international audiences with another $50 million since its release last week. But this is overall looking like a big lump of coal for Amazon. Red One's number 1 finish meant that Venom: The Last Dance was finally knocked off its extended perch after 3 weeks, down to second with 7.3 million. Sony's release is now at 127.6 million. The weekend is behind the first sequel, Venom: Let There Be Carnage, which had a 9.4 million fourth weekend and is approximately $65 million ahead of its 24-day pace. However, it is about 6 million off the pace of No Time to Die, which had a $7.7 million fourth outing, so many signs are pointing to a final domestic landing in the 155 to 160 million range. Worldwide, the film is over $436 million and eyeing a shot at $500 million. Another $30 million domestic may be just what it needs to put it over the top. Third and fourth place was another close battle between last week's openers. When the dust settled last week, Heretic ultimately won, but the script was flipped as the best Christmas pageant ever held on with $5.4 million. That brings the Lionsgate release up to $19.9 million. Heretic was not far behind with $5.1 million, and the A24 release is still a nudge over pageant overall with $20.4 million. Both releases reportedly cost in the vicinity of $10 million each and are headed into profit territory. In the top 5 for its 8th straight week, Chris Sanders' The Wild Robot continues to add to its totals. Its $4.3 million this week brings it to $137.7 million and over $308 million worldwide. There is another impressive number that has the film climbing another chart, though. The Ole multiple. Measured from its opening weekend to its ultimate total, The Wild Robot is now 8th on the year among initial wide releases of over 1,000 theaters with a multiple of 3.84. And while it continues to climb, it has the following films in front of it: Thelma, 3.89, Reagan, 3.92, The Beekeeper, 3.99, Inside Out 2, 4.23, The Forge, 4.34, Despicable Me 4, 4.81, and The Substance. The animated film, which is one of the favorites to take home the Oscar this year, may not climb to the top of the chart, but it will find itself in the top 5 and possibly even the top 3, barring another big word-of-mouth success over the holiday season, where those numbers do tend to be high, given Christmas vacation. Smile 2 is not exactly Christmas material, but it continues to draw crowds and up that profit margin for Paramount. Its $2.9 million in its 5th weekend gives it a total of $65.6 million. It is not far from hitting the magical 3 multiple itself, once it gets to $70 million. It is over $130 million worldwide, making the numbers ultimately around $30 million and $70 million less than the original. But with $28 million, that is still good enough to make it one of the 20 most profitable films of the year to date. Focus is about to have its highest-grossing film since The Spring of the Northman and Downton Abbey: A New Era back in 2022. Edward Berger's Conclave added $2.8 million to its total this week. The papal thriller has had drops of 23.7%, 18.1%, and now 31%, as it has expanded its run a little week to week. After an initial start of 1,753 theaters, the film is now in 2,377 and is enjoying the kind of adult-level attendance that can often mean good news for award season as well. Speaking of award season, Jesse Eisenberg's A Real Pain expanded this week into 1,185 theaters after 2 weeks of solid attendance in limited release. This weekend with $2.3 million, the numbers are most reminiscent of The Peanut Butter Falcon from August 2019. That film started in 17 theaters, $204,793, moved into 49 the next week, $287,712, and then went wide to 996 theaters in weekend 3 and made $2.97 million. 2 solid weeks of per-theater averages in 5 digits is now down to $1,940. Falcon continued to expand and made several millions in that time on its way to over $20 million. A Real Pain is already below Falcon's 3rd week average, $2,986. It's an award season player, so it could still pick up some interest and stretch, but we'll see if this isn't another failed platform release that couldn't get to $20 million. Sean Baker's Anora added 396 theaters this weekend to bring its total up to 1,500, and it grossed $1.84 million. The film now stands at $10.5 million, despite its per-theater average going down to $1,226 in its 5th weekend of release. Consider that Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans was down to a $1,205 PTA in its 5th weekend, grossing $1.17 million in 973 theaters. It had made just $7.32 million in its first 31 days and ultimately finished with $17.3 million. Even a Steven Spielberg film opening in limited release couldn't find an audience for a $20 million gross. Awards season will begin kicking into gear in a few weeks, with Mikey Madison likely to start garnering honors. Heidi Gardner even played Madison as her Honora character, auditioning for Wicked on this weekend's Saturday Night Live, so perhaps Honora could still drift its way towards that limited release milestone. A24's limited release of We Live in Time did manage to pay off in that respect. Last weekend, it passed $20 million, and with $1.3 million this weekend, it has made $23.9 million to date and will pass $25 million. Spielberg's one-time protege, Robert Zemeckis, saw his latest film, Here, lose over 1,000 theaters in weekend 3, and it grossed $865,000 for a total of $11.6 million. Janus Films' release of Payal Kapadia's All We Imagine as Light in 3 theaters garnered it $51,000 for a PTA of $17,000. It will expand further next week in major markets. Here was a surprise, though. The Love Through Time Past Lives-esque Filipino romance, Hello, Love Again, with Catherine Bernardo and Alden Richards, broke into the top 10 with $2.32 million from just 248 theaters. That is a solid $9,379 PTA, better than even Red One's $8,450, and second only to All We Imagine as Light this week. Everyone is already trying to put the Barbenheimer stamp on next weekend. Just be careful how you combine Gladiator 2 and Wicked. Yes, the longtime Broadway sensation finally makes it to the big screen, giving itself the Dune treatment by advertising itself as Wicked rather than Wicked Part 1, which it is in all of its 160-minute glory, with Part 2 slated to open next November. It will go up against Ridley Scott's 24 years in the making Gladiator 2, the sequel to his Best Picture-winning film from 2000. Scott's film has already grossed $87 million at the international box office, and both are expected to make quite a splash at the box office and into Thanksgiving and the rest of the holiday season. Will Red One, a Christmas action comedy where Dwayne Johnson plays Santa's head of security, bring movie theaters a box office bounty? The film from Amazon MGM is targeting $30 million to $35 million from 4,032 locations in its first weekend of release. Independent tracking services are mixed, suggesting that Red One could earn as little as $25 million and as much as $40 million in its debut. Ticket sales on the higher end of that range would be decent for an original holiday film. However, Red One cost $250 million before accounting for global marketing efforts. So either way, the movie will need positive word of mouth to portend a long life in theaters and justify its cost. Of course, Amazon MGM cares about much more than box office grosses and maintains that its big-budget tentpoles don't need to score on the big screen to be deemed a success. The streaming behemoth views movie theaters as a way to lure top talent to projects, as well as generate buzz for the streaming service, Prime Video. However, viewership data from streamers aren't reported as uniformly as box office returns, so it's impossible to determine if the financial gamble ever pays off. In the case of Red One, the film was commissioned for streaming before Amazon MGM opted to bring it to theaters, so any box office returns will be a bonus for the studio and exhibitors. Red One already kicked off at the international box office with a meager $28 million from 25,195 screens across 75 overseas markets. Warner Bros. Is rolling out the film in overseas markets as part of a distribution deal with Amazon MGM. Jake Kasdan, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, directed the film, which picks up with the kidnapping of Saint Nick, J.K. Simmons, whose disappearance triggers a rescue mission led by a gruff North Pole bodyguard, Johnson, and a bounty hunter, Chris Evans. Critics have panned Red One. It generated a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, with Variety's chief film critic, Owen Gleiberman, describing the movie as having charmless energy. In his review, Gleiberman wrote that he's not sure that a Hollywood movie has ever kicked off the season with less true Christmas spirit. Now, this is where the old studios of yore, even those with streaming services, can't handle the truth, and that is, any loss from Red One won't rock Amazon in the same way that it tips the entertainment content divisions of Lionsgate, Warner Bros. Discovery, Disney, etc. Amazon is a place where there's no stakes, says one industry source with knowledge of the nuts and bolts of the shopping site studio. Meaning failure doesn't hit them in the gut on a Monday morning. the same way like it does for a studio in Universal City, Burbank, or on Melrose Ave. Amazon claims that the benefits of Red One will be realized down the road in other ways. That's what they said about their $100 million pickup of Ben Affleck's Air, and we have yet to get the financial report from Amazon on the uptick in sales on Nikes or the surge in sales in short tennis dresses from the Zendaya movie challengers. Here's what I will tell you. When Red One hits Prime, it will ultimately have ads sold against it, likely in its second window the following year. This past fall, Amazon MGM Studios started selling movies at MIP. Essentially, there's a downstream. Sources in the streaming sphere and Zen-minded talent reps tell me that despite the lackluster result here for Red One, it's a win for Amazon. Golly gosh, how? This is a movie originally built for streaming, so its exorbitant costs were already accounted for by Amazon via the Prime service. Theatrical is gravy, and was the right move for Amazon MGM Studios to do. Theatrical launches have shown that movies have longer legs on streaming services. Furthermore, the rationale behind Amazon MGM Studios' pivot to theatrical in this case hinged on a big screen release covering this movie's marketing cost, which we hear is $100 million global. It's not clear if Red One can emulate the final domestic gross of Johnson's Rampage, which opened to $35.7 million. That movie took more than 15 weekends to get to $101 million stateside. Overseas, Red One stands at $50 million to date after a $14.7 million second weekend in 75 territories. Worldwide take to date is $84 million. So, once again, is Red One a success or a failure for Amazon MGM Studios? That depends on whether I get a press release on Monday morning that the studio is fully committing to the next $250 million Dwayne Johnson movie. On the specialty side, there was something wonderful going on, and was the Filipino movie Hello, Love Again via Abramarama, with Amaret Jones Media Consulting, aka AJMC, which made $2.4 million at 248 sites, busting into the top 10. That's an awesome opening record for a Filipino movie, beating the entire gross of the Dante Bosco rom-com, The Debut, won $7 from 2000. It's also the widest ever for a Filipino feature. Hello, Love Again also had the highest theater average of the weekend at 97Ks. The romantic comedy is a sequel to 2019's Hello, Love, Goodbye, which did receive a theatrical release and made $2 million from 77 runs. The sequel here, in its opening weekend, clearly outgrossed the entire cume of the first movie. Audiences are in love with Hello, Love Again, with 96% on the Rotten Tomatoes audience meter. Hello, Love Again picks up 5 years after Joy, Catherine Bernardo, said goodbye to Ethan, Alden Richards, and Hong Kong to pursue her dreams in Canada. Reuniting in a new country after overcoming distance and a global shutdown, Joy and Ethan must navigate the complexities of their changed lives and rediscover their connection amidst new challenges. What's been great post-COVID is that, with the virtual print fee going away, it's inexpensive for indie distributors to release a movie, the fee dropping as low at $65 per run. AJMC executed a highly targeted social media strategy to promote the movie aimed at Filipino-American audiences, as well as Asian American, Hispanic, and general moviegoers. The largely grassroots marketing push leveraged the fan base of Catherine Bernardo and Alden Richards, along with strategic partnerships with platforms like ABS-CBN's TFC and Cinema One. The U.S. distribution strategy was designed by Joe Gorell, who zeroed in on booking Hello, Love Again at cinemas in Filipino-American communities like LA, Dallas, San Francisco, Seattle, and San Diego. NYC's 34th Street Multiplex had the best gross. Evan Saxon of Abramarama was behind the Canadian booking of the sequel. This is the first time that a theatrical distribution plan has been assembled for a movie aimed at Filipino-American audiences. It's something I've always wanted to do with him, actually. It was something I've talked about doing in Jumanji, Kasdan tells The Hollywood Reporter. So I was always looking for the perfect opportunity for him to shrink and stay perfectly proportional as this incredibly strong, tiny version of himself. Speaking of Jumanji, Sony recently dated Kasdan's third movie in the reboot trilogy and the fourth directly connected film in the overall franchise for 2026. Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle 2017, and 2019's The Next Level reference, and include characters from Joe Johnston's 1995 original starring Robin Williams, Kirsten Dunst, and Bonnie Hunt, who also plays Mrs. Claus in Red One, but they've yet to fully merge the two storylines. Jon Favreau's 2005 film Zathura is arguably connected to the Jumanji film series as well, since it's based on Chris Van Allsburg's sequel to his Jumanji children's picture book. Earlier this year, Dunst told THR she's never been approached about a cameo in the current trilogy that features the likes of Johnson, Jack Black, Karen Gillan, and Kevin Hart. But Kasdan explains that it's not for lack of trying. The ending of the 1995 film resets the game adventure that Dunst, Judy, and her brother completed alongside Williams, Alan, and Hunt's Sarah, with only the latter two characters remembering all that took place by the closing credits. We love Kirsten. The way the original movie ends, as brilliant as it is, creates a lot of plot complications in trying to continue the story with those characters, Kasdan says. But that said, within that complication, we've loved trying to figure out some way to do it in a way that is fun and passes some kind of fidelity to the original story. Below, during a recent conversation with THR, Kasdan talks his third Jumanji, All Things Red One, now in theaters, and disputes Johnson's reported misbehavior on set. Honestly, I just got excited about the idea for Red One. We were already working on Jumanji, and we're still working on Jumanji, but Hiram Garcia, who works with Dwayne, had been thinking about something like this for a long time. He cooked up the beginnings of what Red One turned into, and he called me up one day and said, "What do you think of this?" So I just immediately latched onto it, and that excitement took on its own momentum to where it went first. It was an opportunity to do a fun, funny holiday movie that I'd never really seen before, and it really was as simple as getting excited about what the kernel idea could be. Was Hiram Garcia's original idea based around treating Santa like a military or government operation? That was part of it. The first idea that I grabbed onto was pulling back the curtain and seeing what the North Pole is really like. There's the story you've been told, and then there's the real-life version. We wanted to realistically fill out the world. What would the North Pole have to look like in order to pull off this enormous task every year? And what kind of guy would actually be at the top of that operation? The second part was this notion of DJ. Playing Santa's right-hand man / head of security, or the head of the North Pole Secret Service. It was such a fun, funny idea, and it's so completely perfect for Dwayne that you could only do it with him. He's capable of many things, but there are some roles where you can't imagine another person doing it. It fits perfectly within his persona and all that he brings to a movie like this. I grew up in Orange County, which you're vaguely familiar with, and there were a lot of families that celebrated both of the major gift-giving holidays at the end of the year. Did the Kasdans as well? Or is Christmas ubiquitous enough that you understood the assignment? We did a little bit. I have 3 kids of my own, and we celebrate Christmas. But I do think it is ubiquitous enough. It's universal. Is Christmas the pinnacle of marketing? It's hard not to get swept up in its enchantment, no matter who you are. Yeah, I think that's true. It is the pinnacle of marketing, but it's only possible because it rings such a powerful bell with people. It's just really meaningful to a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. So when you step into something like this, you know that you have to find your own lane, but you also have to respect that you're working in an arena that's incredibly important to a lot of different people all over the world. So you want to be respectful, but you also want to find opportunities to have fun. People increasingly want Christmas to start earlier and earlier, and part of that is probably commercial. But another part of it is that people love it, and so they are eager to get to it. Many of Red One's recognizable elements are in the public domain, such as all things Santa Claus, the Headless Horseman, and Krampus. Were the brand-name toys, such as Hot Wheels and Rock'em Sock'em Robots, the only major things you had to clear? Those were the big ones. The original idea had to do with taking our first steps into what we call the mythological realm and doing a different take on some of these age-old mythological characters. So, the age-old stuff does tend to be in the public domain, but it's still an original movie. It's not based on any pre-existing material in the way that we've become accustomed to it, but in a more classic sense, we're drawing on tales as old as time, so to speak. Were you aware that Red One is not the first time that Dwayne has played a character who's been able to shrink himself? He did so in Tooth Fairy. Yes, absolutely. That was brought to my attention later in the process. But the shrinking has got its own unique character to it here. It's something I've always wanted to do with him, actually. It was something I've talked about doing in Jumanji, so I was always looking for the perfect opportunity for him to shrink and stay perfectly proportional as this incredibly strong, tiny version of himself. Some younger viewers will probably think you took a page out of Ant-Man's playbook with his character's ability to shrink himself and enlarge Hot Wheels into working vehicles. But miniature characters in particular have been around since the earliest days of cinema. Did you expect to have a generational gap in that regard? Well, we were conscious of that. The growing and shrinking is a reference to what you know about elves and what elves are really like. They have this smaller form that they sometimes need to use for practical purposes. And then it was always important to us that what they're actually doing is making things real. Cal takes a toy car and turns it into a real car. He takes the robots and turns them into life-sized versions that can make decisions and are animated with life. Dwayne took some heat in connection to this movie, but based on the fact that you've made 3 movies together and are about to make a 4th, you clearly work well together. Were those previous reports about his misbehavior blown out of proportion in your estimation? Wildly, and largely inaccurate. Like you said, I have made 3 movies in a row with him. I know him really well. He's a really good guy to work with, and we've had a great time together. He's good to every single person he encounters. In hundreds of days of shooting, I've never seen him be anything but a totally stand-up, generous dude with everybody that he works with and everybody he encounters. The guy that you see out in the world and that he presents is very much what he's like. And if I didn't love working with him, I wouldn't keep doing it. He's that great. I'm assuming you've seen Challengers by now, so were you a little disappointed that Luca Guadagnino beat you to the punch on the churros? Note, Chris Evans' Jack O'Malley, while taking his estranged son to school, stops mid-route for a curbside pickup of 2 churros. That's funny. I feel like we're onto something in the culture. It's the year of the churro in film. The casting of Bonnie Hunt as Mrs. Claus, I see what you're doing here, Jake. Is this a precursor to the next Jumanji movie? Were you and Dwayne playing the long game so she'd return to Jumanji? That's a good idea. I talked to her a lot about our familial Jumanji connection, and she's the best. She's just great. She's someone I've always wanted to work with, and this was a great opportunity to finally do it. It's a small but beloved part of the movie for me, and when she came in, she was all you'd want her to be. As recently reported, Jumanji 3 is finally materializing in 2026, but it sounds like you've been developing it off and on this entire time. Yeah, exactly. We've been working on it on and off throughout the years. Obviously, I went away and made Red One, which was a big deal. It took time and focus and all that it takes to make a movie like this. I also made the previous 2 Jumanji movies back to back, and we had a great time making those movies. Those were 4 fantastic years in a row, but it was good for us to take a breath and step away from it for a second. Creatively, it's good to be able to think about what the next one should be and also just think about other things for a minute. So returning to it has been a great feeling, and I've loved stepping back into it lately. We're really starting to contemplate how to do something new with the parts that we love. I spoke to your Jumanji actor, Alex Wolff, recently, and every time I talk to him, I bring up the fact that he already came up with the perfect title for this next movie. It came about because I once commented how the end of Jumanji: The Next Level harks back to the original film, as the game elements have returned to the real world. So he coined Jumanji Full Circle, and he signed it over to you. I love that. It's great. I love that guy. He's really onto something. I also talked to Kirsten Dunst earlier this year, and she said that she's never been approached about a cameo. She too would bring things full circle, as would Bonnie Hunt. We love Kirsten. She's fantastic. From the time we did Welcome to the Jungle, we were very focused on keeping a little bit of connectivity to the original movie, which we love. We've always wanted to honor it and keep enough of it alive. Also, the way the original movie ends, as brilliant as it is, creates a lot of plot complications in trying to continue the story with those characters. I don't know how well you remember it, but the world reverts back to what it was before, as though it never happened. Some of the characters are still aware of what happened, but most of them aren't. So the kids, including Dunce Judy, don't remember because it short-circuits the part where they have the adventure, but Robin Williams and Bonnie's characters are aware. So it has this complicated, clever bit of storytelling at the end that has always made the challenge of continuing their story very complicated. But that said, within that complication, we've loved trying to figure out some way to do it in a way that is fun and passes some kind of fidelity to the original story. So in Welcome to the Jungle, there are some references to Robin's character, and then in the next level we have a character, Judy's aunt Nora, played by Babe Newirth, that comes back in a way and obeys the previous story told, but in a slightly sideways way. In the next level, Nora now owns a local diner, but she makes no mention of her niece and nephew. If you can pull off a polar bear as a Secret Service agent in Red One, then I'm confident you can find a way. Now that you've made a Christmas action movie, it's important that you weigh in on the decades-long debate. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? I would say it is, yeah, but it's great in that it stands up any time of year. So it's certainly not a movie that you would only watch at Christmas, but it's a Christmas movie as well. Lastly, Red One is partially about adults rediscovering their inner child, and it seems like a lot of people today could use a check-in with their childhood self. Was that theme on your mind? Absolutely, it was really important to all of us to have a thematic core message at the center of Red One. It's a very affirmative idea, encouraging people to give each other the benefit of the doubt and a little bit of grace, and remember that everybody is a human being. So that was definitely on my mind, and it's one of the things that we're reflecting on in different corners of the movie. This profoundly depressing and blandly sentimental Christmas comedy for early November stars Dwayne Johnson as Santa's bodyguard, out to rescue him from kidnappers and so save Christmas. With an unvarying smirk, Chris Evans co-stars as a roguish professional thief with an assumed heart of gold called Jack O'Malley, whose cynical way of life was imprinted on him as a child when he found himself threatened with the naughty list for presuming to question Santa's existence. Now he is separated from the mother of his child and neglectful of his son. Without realizing the awfulness of what he's getting into, Jack is recruited by shadowy evildoers to steal the top-secret coordinates of a certain flying craft drawn by airborne reindeer so that its pilot can be abducted. That is, Santa himself, played by J.K. Simmons, a buff Father Christmas who is devoted to press-ups and working out, perhaps because of the influence of Callum Drift, the head of his security detail, played with Brontosaurus-headed stolidity by Johnson, who is in fact on the point of taking retirement because of a crisis of faith in their mission. Callum and Jack team up to save the day, and Callum's icy disapproval of Jack thaws when he sees what a great guy he really is, and his own vocation begins to return. Lucy Liu phones in the role of Santa's chief of staff, Zoe Harlow, and Kiernan Shipka, who was once Don Draper's angelic daughter, Sally, in TV's Mad Men, does her best with the role of wicked Christmas witch Grilla. But wait, what exactly is that crisis of faith that Callum is talking about? Apparently the naughty list number is up by more than 20%. Wow. A worrying statistic. Humanity is getting worse. So the answer is, what? Prosecute the naughty list rule more stringently? In fact, it is weirdly unclear what precisely the naughty list rule really is, despite it being at the heart of a huge and cumbersome second-act plot development. Do the naughty listers get fewer presents? Surely not no presents at all. There is, of course, in practice, no naughty list rule. No one is seriously inconvenienced or disappointed in this Christmassy world, whose slush and gush smothers all attempts at gags, including a reference to Will Smith's slap of Chris Rock. Even the prologue implies that Jack's sorrowing uncle will disprove his Santa-theism. What we are, of course, left with is a deadly serious emphasis on the overwhelming importance of buying presents in stores. There's nothing wrong with a big-hearted film for Christmas, but this commercial and formulaic slice of content is a toy destined to be forgotten, not by Boxing Day, but mid-November. Red One will remind you of other better movie. There are many questions left unanswered in Red One, but the most pressing has to be, is The Rock playing an elf or not? His character, Callum Drift, is definitely the head of an organization called ELF, which stands for Enforcement, Logistics, and Fortification. There are multiple cute little acronyms like that in this movie, and which is basically the North Pole's answer to the Secret Service. Callum isn't human and is hundreds of years old, and when he fights, he likes to shrink himself down to approximately half his usual size, a trick whose utility isn't entirely clear, but that does support the whole elfin theory. And yet, if the obvious joke is that Dwayne Johnson is playing an unlikely 270 cod and creatine-fueled pounds of Santa's little helper, the movie never quite gets around to landing it. It's as though, because Will Ferrell's Elf got there first, Red One is content with a gesture in the general region of the known hit. Red One was written by the Fast and Furious franchise's Chris Morgan and directed by Jake Kasdan, and the whole thing is like that. Rife with elements that are reminiscent of better movies without ever bothering to follow through on what it's aping. If Red One were a disaster, it'd be more interesting. Instead, it's a technically passable action comedy, transparently stitched together from parts scavenged from other movies. Its brawny take on Santa, played by an unsettlingly swole J.K. Simmons, is reminiscent of the one in Rise of the Guardians. Its high-tech military approach to gift delivery recalls Arthur Christmas. And sure, there are only so many possible reimaginings of Yuletide lore, which is why there's a polar bear guy out of his dark materials and a government organization, Mora, the Mythological Oversight and Restoration Authority, run by a stern Lucy Liu, in a thankless role that seems intended to be the Nick Fury of a theoretical holiday franchise that feels co-opted from Hellboy. Callum's fight choreography recalls a less exaggerated Ant-Man. The dynamic between Callum and tracker Jack O'Malley, Chris Evans, meanwhile, is your classic buddy cop back and forth, with the gruff Callum slowly warming to the disreputable criminal he's forced to partner up with when Santa gets kidnapped 2 days before Christmas. Johnson and Evans could play these types in their sleep, and sometimes look like they might as well be, as they bicker and battle their way through various locations while on the case before making it to the final showdown. Box office, Red One, has itself a fairly little opening day with $10.9 million. It's beginning to look a lot like $30 million for the opening weekend of Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans' mega-budget Christmas actioner Red One, coming in on the shorter side of projections. The Amazon MGM Studios feature unwrapped $10.9 million from 4,032 theaters across opening day and preview screenings in North America. That's not exactly a jolly result for a special effects adventure playing premium large-format auditoriums and sporting a whopping $250 million production budget, plus sizable marketing costs. Unless the $7 production can stay relevant among the blitz of Wicked, Gladiator 2, and Moana 2 arriving ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday, it seems unlikely that Red One will see green in its theatrical run. The question remains of how much Amazon really cares about being associated with lukewarm theatrical returns, what with the market cap north of $2 trillion and all. The cost of Red One doesn't seem as daunting in that context. Amazon bid big for the project back in 2021, and the logic is that the film can be a holiday season monster on Prime Video, where it can also supplement Amazon's e-commerce business amid holiday shopping. Additionally, Red One was originally commissioned as a Prime Video exclusive before Amazon added a wide release, so any box office profits are presumably just extra stocking stuffers to the company. For Amazon MGM, Red One will easily score the banner's largest opening weekend since Creed III, which was commissioned under MGM's old regime and released just a year after its acquisition. And Red One is on a brighter path than last spring's Apple play, Argyle, another expensive action movie with franchise potential. That film carried a $200 million price tag and finished with $96 million worldwide before hitting Apple TV+, which has a significantly smaller reach than Amazon Prime. Even so, there's some bah humbugging to be had with Red One as a test of its star's theatrical draw. The film won't match the opening weekends of either of Johnson's previous two vehicles, Black Adam, $67 million, and Jungle Cruise, $35 million, the latter of which simultaneously launched on Disney Plus as a premium rental. And it's not a triumphant theatrical return for Evans, whose leading live-action roles have lived on streaming since he finished playing Captain America in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Red One is directed by Jake Kasdan and follows a plot of combat-trained specialists rescuing a kidnapped Santa Claus, J.K. Simmons. Critics panned the movie, but audiences are much more merry, with moviegoer pollster CinemaScore turning in a positive A grade among early ticket buyers. It'll need to be on the public's nice list for the chance to keep drawing audiences. Sony's Venom: The Last Dance should slide to second after spending 3 weekends on top of domestic charts, looking at $6.1 million for a 61% drop in its fourth outing. The Marvel spin-off has now surpassed $120 million in North America and $400 million worldwide. Holding well after an underwhelming launch, it now seems Tom Hardy's buddy comedy won't finish too far off from its franchise predecessor, Let There Be Carnage, which finished with a global gross of $500 million. Third goes to The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, eyeing a 54% drop for $6 million. On a $10 million production budget, the Lionsgate release will cross $20 million domestic shortly after the weekend, a solid theatrical performance for Christianity-focused production banner Kingdom Story Company. A24's psychological thriller Heretic looks to slide to fourth place, with rivals projecting a $4.6 million sophomore outing. That'd be a 57% drop. The Hugh Grant horror film will also cross $20 million through Monday. Universal's The Wild Robot looks to round out the top 5, projecting another slim drop, -32%, to bolster its gross with another $4.5 million. The DreamWorks animation production is still kicking around the top of the charts in its 8th weekend of release. It looks to hit a $137 million domestic total through Sunday. After that, it will pass fellow Lupita Nyong'o starrer A Quiet Place Day 1, $138 million, to notch itself as the 12th highest-grossing North American release of the year. Red One Review. Here's the bad joke of Hollywood Christmas movies. They tend to begin and end with a blast of old-school Yuletide cheer, but that's just a tease. In between, most of them make a point of straying about as far from the Christmas spirit as possible. Instead, they swap in the new American spirit, vulgar, violent, full of fake fun, celebrating its own crassness. To trace the genesis of the anti-Christmas Christmas movie, Jingle All the Way, Violent Night, you would probably have to go back to a couple of movies that are thought of as classics, though not by me, A Christmas Story and Home Alone, both of them glasses of eggnog spiked with misanthropy. It was Jack's handiwork that revealed Santa's precise location in the North Pole, under a dome. It's sort of like the Christmas store version of the Pentagon. And that's what allowed Santa to be kidnapped by Grilla, an ancient witch played by the always welcome Kiernan Shipka, who ever since Mad Men I've thought and still think is going to be a major star. And this movie, in its blunderbuss way, shows why. Grilla is a standard nuance-free, glowering nemesis, like something out of a National Treasure sequel. Yet the way Shipka plays her, there's a tingle to her anger. Her evil dream? To punish everyone on Santa's naughty list. We meet Santa's reindeer, who are interchangeable oversized digital creations referred to as girls. Why would the reindeer be so tall? And why would they all be female? This is the sort of whatever conceit that dots Red One. Cal and Jack start off in Aruba, just because. On the beach, Cal amusingly changes size during a fight and the two have to fend off an attack by ferocious snowmen. But that's just one pit stop. They wind up in Germany in a medieval Star Wars-y cantina trying to save themselves from Santa's estranged half-brother, the giant goatman troll Krampus, Christopher Hivju, at which point you're either on board or, in my case, starting to check your watch. The villains are shapeshifters, but the key thing about Red One is that the whole movie is a shapeshifter. Arduous action jape, low-kitsch Christmas fairy tale, buddy movie, family reconciliation movie, every quadrant and demo must be served. At the movies, Christmas isn't a holiday anymore. It's a concept to be retrofitted. Do you hear those sleigh bells jingling? Come on, it's lovely weather for an over-the-top of the North Pole, through the supply closet portal, cargo plane ride together with you. The number of problems with director Jake Kasdan's Red One could stuff many a stocking, but you can't fault it for its sprawling scale and ambition. Amazon MGM's action-adventure Christmas film is the latest cinematic stab at modernizing the work and vocation of Santa Claus, reimagining jolly Saint Nick as a bench-pressing, snickerdoodle cookie-loving J.K. Simmons, just one of many mythological beings that exist in our world. He's under the watchful eye of the SHIELD-esque Mythological Oversight and Restoration Authority, MORA, one of the many ways Red One tries to tease out its own cinematic universe. But bigger doesn't always mean better, and even with a globe-trotting narrative, A-list stars, and reindeer with the ability to hyperspace travel like the Millennium Falcon, these elements can't cover over thematic negligence and a garish visual palette. It's all gaudy wrapping with no substance. For its first act, Red One manages to dazzle purely through the novelty of how it takes established characters and gives them a modern twist, even if they lead to unintentionally hilarious moments. In an early scene, Santa and his reindeer are escorted out of Philadelphia back to the North Pole by fighter jets. It's Claus as you've never seen him before, folks, backed by the full might of the military-industrial complex. For the sculpted Saint Nick, delivering presents is a matter of physical skill and prowess. Gift delivery is an airtight operation that has to be rehearsed, choreographed, and trained for 364 days a year. After their trip to Philadelphia, the head of North Pole Security, Callum Drift, Dwayne Johnson, confides to Santa that he'd like to retire after this year's Christmas run, having lost faith in their mission given the uptick of people who are on Santa's naughty list. But after renowned hacker Jack O'Malley, Chris Evans, unknowingly sells information revealing Santa's location in the North Pole, a group of enforcers kidnaps him. They're led by the Winter Witch, Grilla, Kiernan Shipka, who thinks Kris Kringle has gone soft and plans to siphon out his magic and imprison everyone on his naughty list in magical snow globes. Callum and Jack reluctantly team up to find Santa and stop Grilla as the world faces the possibility of no Christmas. There's intrigue in how Johnson plays Callum as someone with a crisis of faith, even with direct access to the deity he serves. But it's done with a self-seriousness that doesn't mesh with the thrills Red One tries to deliver. He's channeling his best Father Toller from First Reformed, someone who's lived a century or two too long and has seen the Grinches of the world prosper one too many times. There's potential for exploring how a lapsed believer like Callum could be tempted by the quick and easy, Old Testament-style wrath Grilla provides compared to Santa's doctrine of grace. But the film lacks the emotional bandwidth and trust in its characters to allow them to grow beyond their surface-level characterizations. A film that features Santa's demonic evil brother knocking the head off of a supersized Rock'em Sock'em robot didn't need to offer its take on the dangers of late-stage capitalism. The film spends much of its runtime trying to make Callum's disenchantment feel multidimensional, its saccharine takeaway that kindness will overcome the naughty forces of the world ends up feeling disingenuous. Evans plays an earlier draft of his character from Knives Out, albeit one that's slightly less profane, and his dynamic with Johnson fails to register. Both of these characters are different shades of cynicism, begrudgingly working together, and there's little room for the two to bring out other sides or help each other grow in the way the best buddy cop films do. Likewise, after seeing Lucy Liu, who plays the director of Mora, deliver some of her best work in a film like the upcoming Presents, it's disheartening to see her in a role like this, spending her time barking orders and doing the occasional fight scene and nothing more. It's a problem when your action-adventure film cannot deliver on said action, and those fight sequences, which should have been a selling point for the film, end up being some of its worst features. Take the first major set piece where Santa is kidnapped by Grilla's shape-shifting henchmen and Callum chases after them in the middle of a night snowstorm. The way Kasdan and cinematographer Dan Mundell shoot the action is choppily executed and so hideously lit that there's no clear sense of what's happening. It's ugly chaos. Ironically, it's in the film's small-scale sequences, like when Callum and Krampus, Christopher Hivju, play Krampus-Schlapp and proceed to slap each other across the face till one of them is knocked out, that have the kinetic thrills that are sorely lacking in the bigger set pieces. These fights feel lived in, and it at least feels like Johnson and Hivju were interacting in the same space rather than being digitized scans of actors being dragged across a screen by VFX artists. While Red One may scratch at some interesting ideas about lamenting the world's cruelties, it lacks the narrative depth and commitment to fully explore its angst. After his abduction, Simmons' Santa spends most of the film in a comatose state, his power slowly drained from him. That encapsulates the feeling of watching this film. A state of unconsciousness might be the best way to enjoy it. When Cord Jefferson accepted his Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for last year's American Fiction, he was speaking about Jake Kasdan's Red One without even knowing it. Standing on stage at the Dolby Theater, Oscar in hand, Jefferson said, "I understand that this is a risk-averse industry, I get it. But $200 million movies are also a risk, and it doesn't always work out." Turns out Jefferson was right because Red One is a $250 million movie that does not work. Red One is an overstuffed and overlong Christmas action movie that tries to wrap its arms around too many plot points without concerning itself with making any of them appealing. Every year it seems like a movie comes out early in November to try and capture the attention of holiday-craving moviegoers, and this year Hollywood is offering Red One, which will be forgotten before it even has a chance to enter anyone's Yuletide movie rotation. Dwayne Johnson stars as Callum, who has been Santa's J.K. Simmons, or Nick's, bodyguard for a very long time. Callum takes his job very seriously. He inspects any person or item that may go near Nick with a severe intensity. But, like most people who've been in their job for far too long, Callum is thinking about stepping back from his duties. His plan is thwarted when Nick is kidnapped from the North Pole just a few days before Christmas. Callum, along with the help of Zoe, Lucy Liu, tracks down an infamous computer hacker named Jack, Chris Evans, to try and save Christmas. Callum isn't the jolliest fella around, but he understands the importance of Christmas. Jack, on the other hand, not so much. What ensues is a fairly standard mismatched buddy comedy, which could be amusing if Johnson and Evans created any spark in their banter. The movie's premise is fairly amusing and has the idea for something fun, but the entire film gets drowned out by the $250 million effects thrown at the screen. There's monsters and creatures, globetrotting and fights. Red One is a busy movie that feels obligated to show all the money that's being spent, rather than focusing on anything regarding its story. What's most discouraging about the movie is Johnson and Evans's hearts couldn't be farther from the film itself. Like many of the biggest stars, their work has gravitated towards the streaming sphere. Red One, which is hitting theaters, plays like a movie built for a streamer. It is an MGM Amazon production. There's no sense that the actors are particularly passionate about what they are participating in, and Red One moves and flows like a movie made to fold laundry to. But back to Jefferson. As he continued his Oscar speech, he suggested, instead of making one $200 million movie, try making 20 $10 million movies, or 54 $54 million movies. What a world it would be if Hollywood had the spine to heed Jefferson's advice. There would be more movies like American Fiction, and thankfully fewer movies like Red One. It's never a harbinger of good tidings when the critics' embargo for your $250 million Christmas franchise launcher is 9 p.m. PT on Election Day. But here we are. Amazon MGM Studios' bid at a Marvel-level action comedy spectacle, the ho-ho horrible Red One is a blockbuster-sized cinematic lump of coal, driven as if by narcotized reindeer on a sleigh of hideous CGI and charmless stars with only dancing dollar-shaped sugar plums on the mind. Directed by Jumanji reboot filmmaker Jake Kasdan and written by longtime Fast and Furious scribe Chris Morgan, here is a level 4 naughty lister that will make you wish Christmas were canceled altogether. A cynical, depressing holiday adventure about the abduction of a swolled-up Santa Claus, J.K. Simmons, at least seemingly amused to be in a red and white fur-trimmed two-piece from the North Pole. We know that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who plays St. Nick's personal security detail, can open any movie. Red One should expect to earn a decent bag of cash in theaters, all a bait and switch to lure Prime Video subscribers looking to pass the listless Christmas hours from unboxing presents to dinner time with passive streaming viewing. Will all that a franchise make? To all a good night who find enough enjoyment to help propel this film to a sequel or more? Red One was conceived by story writer and producer Hiram Garcia as the start of a Marvel-sized holiday franchise for Amazon MGM Studios, and the mythological world it opens up suggests a million snow globes worth of possibilities for MCU-level interconnectedness. Leading alongside Johnson is Chris Evans as Jack O'Malley, a high-functioning alcoholic hacker and bounty hunter estranged from his son, Wesley Kimmel, and for whom the workday starts passed out in an empty bathtub, a drained bottle of whiskey just out of focus. If you don't have the head for following Marvel's head-spinning but often fundamentally dumb plot matrices, odds won't much improve for keeping track of the cracked-out, underbaked story in Red One, as Jack's latest job for hire inadvertently causes Santa Claus's kidnapping. At the North Pole, Claus is readying for his grand night of chimney hopping with milk and cookies and ringside support courtesy of Mrs. Claus, poor Bonnie Hunt. But Christmas may have to wait, as he's taken hostage by the Christmas witch Grilla, poor Kiernan Shipka, a flesh-hungry ogress based in Icelandic mythology. St. Nick's disappearance sends North Pole security head Callum Drift Johnson on a tailspin rescue mission on the very eve Callum was about to call it quits. Also, the head of a vaguely shadowy secret ops organization that protects creatures and folks from the mythological world is Lucy Liu, collectively on screen for less time than it takes to sing the chorus of Jingle Bells, and in an unfortunate wig to boot. She and her army of minions, including a talking CGI polar bear on its hind legs, bring Jack in for questioning, though not after they've grilled the Headless Horseman as a possible culprit. So the mismatched Jack, a level 4 naughty lister according to North Pole Brass, and Callum set out to retrieve Santa Claus in time for Christmas Eve. Shameless, just-in-time for holiday shopping product placement is shoved in from Mattel, Rock'em Sock'em Robots, Hot Wheels, and Hasbro Monopoly, only alluding more to the capitalist imperatives that drove the project in the first place. And that could lead to myriad other cynical tie-ins to those toy giants' own upcoming franchise movie plans. There's a ghastly sequence in which Jack and Callum interrogate Nick Kroll as a death merc, one of Grilla's mercenaries, and are chased by a legion of monstrous snowmen whose Achilles' heel is having their carrot nose ripped out. The witchy Grilla, a role even Shipka can't inject life into, aims to steal a naughty list the size of Rhode Island and harvest the souls of all the bad doers to galvanize her takeover of Christmas, or something like that. And Grilla's ex is the Dark Lord of Christmas and Santa Claus's brother, Krampus. Game of Thrones star Christopher Hivju, in gargoyle prosthetics, another foe for Jack and Callum to face down, and for Callum to lose and then win against in a slapping contest in another of the film's childish jabs at winky slapstick humor. It's all slogging toward a sleigh ride showdown in the winter night sky, reminiscent of the visually heinous boss levels of any Marvel movie, where CGI reaches an unintelligible pitch of PG-13 rated cacophony. Perhaps Red One would work a little better, i.e., at all, if Evans and Johnson had any chemistry. At least this film should make you excited for Johnson's entree into serious screen acting with Benny Safdie's upcoming wrestling biopic, The Smashing Machine. You don't watch Red One so much as stare ahead at the screen. It is a movie that is playing in front of you. I can comfortably give it that much, and for one meant to summon up the Christmas spirit, there's not a whiff of mirth from the screenplay to the production level. Red One will make you not only bummed about the holidays ahead, but about cinema's future as well. Yet if you've been paying attention and wasting your money at multiplexes in the process, the latter's a reality far less shattering than the dawning of Santa Claus's own upon a hopeful child. Make it a Christmas miracle and cross this Red One off your list. Good news, everyone. Santa is real. The bad news? Santa is apparently so beset by constant mortal danger that he requires round-the-clock personal protection. That's right. Santa has a team of burly supernatural bodyguards, plus the paramilitary services of a secretive organization called Mora to keep him safe. Safe from what? Well, not us ordinary mortals, that's for certain. Security at the North Pole seems pretty impenetrable to mere muggles as far as we see in Red One. No, MORA is the acronym for Mythological Oversight and Restoration Authority, and it's their agents and paratroopers who are called in to assist when Santa is kidnapped 24 hours out from Christmas Eve. So not only is Santa real, but so is probably every other folkloric being you've ever heard of. I'm not mentioning the ones name-checked here so as not to spoil, which is more than this movie deserves. And one of them wants to harm Santa now, or at least quash Christmas, and plenty of them are up to no good on the regular. A sorry quip about rounding up the usual suspects gets tossed out. I mean, they have to be, because you don't have 24/7, 365 security for someone who isn't a recurring target. Wait, what? I've said this before about movies that posit that Santa actually exists and actually does the whole Christmas Eve global Prezi blast, while also giving us adults who try to convince kids that it isn't their parents who leave gifts under the tree, as this one does. A world in which Santa isn't fantasy would look very different from the world we live in, and no movie, including this one, has ever genuinely dealt with that, as far as I'm aware. But Red One is worse in this regard. It sketches a world in which dark supernatural forces are also in play and have authentic power. Never mind that some creepy old elf can see you when you're sleeping and knows if you've been bad, he's among the nicer of these magical entities. This would be a frightful, anxiety-inducing world to live in. So Red One is a horror movie and it doesn't even realize it. But this movie is even naughtier than that. It thinks it's a cute, cheerful action comedy, but it isn't any of those things either. At best, it's a very copaganda Christmas. Red One is Santa's security code name. Isn't that cool? Massive eye roll. You know, for kids. It elevates Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's muscle-bound bodyguard to a holiday-saving hero, with a minor assist from Lucy Liu as the head of the military-adjacent, vaguely X-Files-esque MORA. Spoiler, not enough Liu here. Johnson's not-quite-human Callum is getting too old for this shit and is on his one last job with Santa before retiring, because you better believe that all the cliches are getting rolled out, and he is forced to team up with Chris Evans's Jack, a human hacker tracker who inadvertently sold out Santa to the uncanny baddie after him, and now has been shanghaied into Old St. Nick, rescuing as well as Natch, being redeemed from his anti-Mary cynicism. But even the hackneyed redemption doesn't really happen, though the movie somehow, bizarrely, seems to think it does. Evans is apparently determined to squander all the cinematic goodwill he generated with his wholesome depiction of Captain America across a slew of Marvel movies, not to mention how he pulled off that chunky sweater in Knives Out, to stand around here screeching, "What the fun! Holy crap!" and "Jesus cripes," paraphrases all, as he encounters magical creature after mythical being that challenge his reality yet never seem to move him at all. If he ever learns the true meaning of Christmas, the lazy, inept script by Fast and Furious veteran Chris Morgan and first-timer Hiram Garcia is unable to articulate this. But he hugs his estranged teenage son in the end, or some shit. This movie cannot even pull off sloppy, kitschy sentimentality with any degree of competence. So when Jack inevitably is forced to team with St. Nick's, J.K. Simmons, convincing enough as a buff elderly Santa Claus and the only actor here who doesn't come across as cringe playing this fantastical material straight, private bodyguard Callum Drift, Dwayne Johnson, someone one expects to be in big-budget whiffs such as this, and learns of not only that jolly old round fellow delivering gifts and spreading Christmas cheer, but an entire special forces team for handling cases involving mythological persons, it's jarring that he immediately accepts this as reality. Whatever Christmas cheer and spirit is supposed to be here is sucked into that formulaic vortex. Perhaps it's too much to expect director Jake Kasdan, working with a script from Chris Morgan and a story conceived by Hiram Garcia, to care about anything established about these characters. This is an expensive film slathered in CGI, and not only during the action sequences, to the point where the special effects team was clearly spread so thin that they didn't have the manpower, and possibly the time, to make any of it look remotely visually appealing. Everything here looks blurry, sludgy, and washed out, which also works against whatever response the movie tries to elicit. its attempts at blockbuster action-packed spectacle are weightless. Meanwhile, fantasy characters such as anthropomorphic bodyguard polar bears, North Pole trolls, and violent snowmen are a cross between generic and lacking a magical spark or personality to make them aesthetically and characteristically interesting. That's not to say the script is devoid of imagination. The filmmakers are certainly trying to be playful and to implement as many spins on Saint Nick mythology as they can, and presumably set up spin-off movies, considering this is an entire universe where fictional characters such as the Headless Horseman also exist. But it results in a bizarre assemblage of superhero movie tropes and several side quests and plot points that are either generic or feel blatantly stolen from other famous characters. Callum has a gadget that allows him to shrink himself or enlarge toys to be used as weapons/vehicles, as if The Rock is fuming he missed out on the chance to play Ant-Man. While this, shockingly, doesn't feel like rock bottom for Dwayne Johnson, it is presumably more painful than an actual rock bottom square in the middle of a wrestling ring, listening to the overly straight-faced, serious dialogue he delivers about saving Santa Claus and Christmas, or losing his Christmas spirit. This is the first year that the naughty list is longer than the ones reserved for well-behaved children. But he is also disappointed in how selfish and mean-spirited adults have become. Again, such motivations for all characters completely disappear roughly 20 minutes into the movie, devolving into a hollow, empty spectacle. These speeches usually come opposite Chris Evans' Jack, who is meant to be a vessel for the audience to be in shock at whatever the movie throws out next. Jack is also saddled with some family drama as an absentee father to young Dylan, Wesley Kimmel, who wants his dad to be present in his life more, even if he doesn't know how to, or feel he should have to, express that. Since Jack becomes entangled in a globe-trotting race-against-time rescue mission, there are portals inside toy stores for fast travel, missing a pageant his son participates in becomes more likely by the minute. None of this fits inside the fantastical extravaganza Red One is desperately trying to entertain as, and it's also somewhat unforgivable as a family-friendly plot element. It's paint-by-numbers family drama. As for what Saint Nick's kidnappers are trying to accomplish, that is one of the more mildly intriguing elements, thanks to Kiernan Shipka chewing some scenery as a witchy villain. It's also a somewhat refreshingly original concept for a plan Thanos would probably approve of. Again, Red One has no shortage of creative ideas, but they don't coalesce into anything dazzling, exciting, or compelling. The film is so indebted to CGI that nothing feels real or worth investing in. It's also unsurprising that the one primarily practical effects-driven fantastical character here, Christopher Hivju's Krampus, is one of the only exceptions. Even some of the action briefly comes alive at a beach resort, simply because it's a real place and offers more freedom to play with fight choreography. Then again, why these characters go to such an area in a supposed Christmas movie is baffling. Most unsettling is the feeling that the filmmakers and studio behind Red One are aware of this, choosing to screen the film for press in 4DX, presumably hoping to distract critics from how visually ghastly everything on screen looks. That said, there is a mild amount of respectable ambition here that, bluntly, goes sideways and down under. Having solid ideas to twist around mythology is a decent starting point, but relying on excessive CGI, a laughably asinine self-serious tone for a movie about rescuing Santa Claus from an evil witch, led by charisma-zapped performances Chris Evans and Dwayne Johnson, sinks that sliver of promise like a flying sled crashing into some poor bastard's home. None of that matters if the film doesn't have any real spirit. The attempt to put Santa Claus, J.K. Simmons, in the middle of a lot of frenetic brawling and then wrap the whole thing up with a climactic sleigh chase leads to a hopelessly unbalanced tone in this ill-conceived holiday offering. Despite a conversion story for one of the main characters, moreover, this is far too hard-edged a production to be in any way family-friendly. After Saint Nick is kidnapped, Johnson's Callum Drift and his team trace the breach of North Pole security that enabled the abduction to gifted but mercenary internet hacker Jack O'Malley, Chris Evans, since cynical Jack has, since childhood, denied the very existence of the Jolly One. However, it soon becomes clear that for all his moral shortcomings, he was acting inadvertently. Belatedly realizing what a catastrophe he's helped bring about, Jack agrees to help Callum and his boss, Zoe, Lucy Liu, catch the real culprit. But straight arrow Callum has taken an instant dislike to this shady scoundrel and only agrees to team with him under orders from Zoe. So the newly minted odd couple take up the chase. Clues eventually lead them to one of Santa's long-standing adversaries, a shape-shifting witch called Grilla, Kiernan Shipka. With Santa neutralized, she plans to ruin the impending holiday by punishing every person on his naughty list. Needless to say, that means a host of potential victims around the world. The mayhem Grilla's nefarious plot unleashes remains thoroughly stylized throughout, and the values put forward in an almost preachy way by Chris Morgan's script are respectable from a Judeo-Christian perspective. Thus, Grilla is about retribution, but Santa, who sees the inner child in even the most wayward grown-up, is about mercy and forbearance. As for Jack, isn't it high time he worked on being a better father to his mildly misbehaving son Dylan, Wesley Kimmel? The lad's mom, Olivia, Mary Elizabeth Ellis, to whom we learn Jack was never married, certainly thinks so. All well and good. Yet, cinematically, director Jake Kasdan never finds his footing. Nor does it seem likely that he ever could have, since early scenes alternately set in Aruba and at the site of Santa's captivity may have viewers of a certain age imagining the effect of Father Christmas wandering into an episode of Miami Vice. To put it another way, Dasher and Dashiell Hammett simply do not mix. Additionally, Red One is a good reminder that not every Yuletide movie is geared toward youngsters. In this case, the screenplay's vulgar vocabulary, while certainly not excessive by Hollywood standards, does flag the proceedings as strictly off-limits for kids. The film contains considerable bloodless violence, fleeting partial nudity, references to a character's out-of-wedlock birth, about a dozen instances each of mild swearing and crude language, at least one rough term, and a couple of crass expressions. The OSV News classification is A3, Adults. The Motion Picture Association rating is PG-13, parents strongly cautioned. Some material may be inappropriate for children under 13. It might not be the holidays yet, but Amazon MGM wants you to hang up your stockings early for Red One, the high-concept caper starring Dwayne Johnson, Chris Evans, and J.K. Simmons. Johnson plays the role he was born for, a hulking head of security to Simmons' Santa Claus, who is disillusioned with humanity's lack of goodness, and one day from retirement. That said, this part is supposed to be about the praiseworthy elements, and there will be criticism enough to come. The art design on show and the costume work, particularly the monsters and magical sets, is legitimately award-worthy. The sets are imaginative and impressively realized, the effects work mostly stands up, and if you're looking for a movie that has a very high frequency of wire-assisted stuntmen being flung through the air, then Red One is for you. Red One's cast actually hides its best performance, which belongs to Christopher Hivju as a new take on Krampus, which was genius casting. He plays the monster with just the right touch of his Game of Thrones character, Tormund Giantsbane, a lascivious, hedonistic rogue who loves chaos. That dark charm suits Hivju, even if he's robbed of lots of his ability to emote by an impressive but very heavy full-body prosthetic suit. Red One's most difficult demand of the audience is explaining who it's actually for. Typically, I try to avoid this explicitly impacting my viewing experience and setting it aside for later, if it's relevant, but I was sucked into the question repeatedly by the film's preposterously wandering tone. There are moments that suggest Kasdan wanted to make something more adult, with jokes and subtle winks that are wholly inappropriate for kids. But then there's also an obvious play to 10-year-old boys, too. In the end, I came to the Christmas epiphany that Red One is basically aimed at Fortnite players who wouldn't be seen dead enjoying a typical Christmas film. The set pieces play like disparate levels in a video game, a narrative style that actually worked for Jumanji, given, the fact that it is a video game movie, impressive in themselves but not really in service of the wider story. So while there's a careful eye for spectacle and an obvious embrace of the comic book movie style of filmmaking, it's not wholly successful because someone seems to have forgotten to make it all fun. That parallel to comic book movies is a pertinent one given the obvious cost on display. Red One was initially intended to be released on Amazon Prime, but delays thanks to Hollywood's 2023 strikes and the apparent promise of early test scores led to a theatrical swerve. It does feel grand enough to be a theatrical movie, too, because there are so many creative decisions that are drenched in money that it's little wonder that the budget is reported as anywhere between $200 million and $250 million. Unlike some ballooned budgets, you can see where all of that money went. Putting aside the undoubtedly costly lead cast, there is a massive amount of effects work, masses of prosthetics for multiple background characters, massive sets, and a commitment to wonder that I wish had translated into more emotional substance. As it is, I couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of the cost when entirely CG characters, like the polar bear used heavily in the marketing, fail to justify their inclusion at all. I don't begrudge the movie that budget. Why should I? It's not my money, but the excess doesn't match the substance, and I wish more of the cost had gone into developing a story to match the production values, or a script with any memorable moments beyond The Rock saying, "Dockhead" once. The Rock's performance is curiously joyless, as if he took the character notes of a cynical, circumstantial Grinch too literally. Annoyingly, there was lots of promise here. Red One is essentially a buddy cop movie, as already mentioned, but it's so trope-aware and so riddled with cliches that it would have been better leaning into the meta-narrative, like Jumanji did. The Rock's Cal would have worked wonderfully against Evans's misfit if he was played like a Shane Black character, knowingly, comically stoic instead of accidentally bland. That means certain setups that could have paid comic dividends, like Cal's power to shrink at will during fight sequences, would have had more magic. Instead, you're left wondering why everything is so miserably serious. That's the case with the whole movie, frankly. It's almost entirely devoid of feeling. The worldview is cynical by design, but then it sort of just forgets to make the necessary case for humanity before the point of no return. So, when the only flourish of poignancy arrives at the very end, it rings rather hollow. Chris Evans does a good job of standing in for the audience, perpetually baffled at everything he encounters and a little lost at the story's various developments. He does play a charismatic rogue quite well, even if his character feels like he's playing dress-up as Ryan Reynolds, but the script lets him down badly. Most fatally, at no point does he really earn the emotional pivot at the end. Elsewhere, there's a very odd cameo by Nick Kroll, a fairly pointless supporting role for Bonnie Hunt as Mrs. Claus, a bafflingly underused Lucy Liu, and Kiernan Shipka as the villain, Grilla, the Christmas witch, who the film attempts to gaslight you into believing is as big a part of collective Christmas consciousness as Krampus. She is not, and Shipka plays her like a Buffy villain of the week. J.K. Simmons is a comparative success as the titular Red One, an athletic Jim Bunny version of Santa Claus with more than a touch of big city hipster about him. He literally sits out a good portion of the movie, though, as the kidnapped victim of Grilla's army of personality-free goons, so that counts against him in the movie. Watching him magically deliver the presents is a rare spot of fun, admittedly. Where were the laughs? Where was the fun? A Christmas movie can get by on a lot less than most movies, as evidenced by the success of the likes of Netflix's Christmas Chronicles, but Red One borders on being insipid. It's like a big Christmas dinner designed by committee, but not actually cooked for flavor. There's lots of bells and whistles, but in attempting to deconstruct and reconstruct Christmas spirit, there's just never enough charm to carry the spell. Perhaps it's true that Red One would have landed better on streaming. That might even be more true if it were releasing a month later, when festive spirit makes us all a bit more open to ridiculousness. But here and now, I'm left with the overriding feeling that the movie's early commentary on the commercialization and commodification of Christmas was a pretty chilling premonition. In Red One, Santa Claus, J.K. Simmons, has been kidnapped from the North Pole, putting the entire holiday of Christmas in jeopardy as his whereabouts are unknown. Luckily, his head of security, Callum Drift, Dwayne Johnson, has recruited one of the world's most infamous bounty hunters named Jack O'Malley, Chris Evans, to help him track Santa down and save Christmas. Rounding out the impressive cast, there's Lucy Liu, Bonnie Hunt, Nick Kroll, and Kiernan Shipka as the sinister Gryla. In terms of the story, it's a massive waste of narrative potential. The central conceit is charming and somewhat original, but every facet of this story feels like heavily treaded ground. Instead of exploring the fascinating mythology it establishes early on and weaving it into the story organically, it instead jets from one location to the next, shifting from one mediocre action set piece to the next while delivering cringeworthy humor and gags. The film feels like a rushed mess, never slowing down enough to provide much-needed character depth or warmth, especially in regards to O'Malley's estranged relationship with his son, which easily could have been the compelling emotional core of the film. However, the biggest problem the film suffers from is that not only does it not entrench itself in the Christmas spirit like it should, it also ultimately feels like an emotionally hollow adventure. Anytime the film tries to pull at the heartstrings and wring any sort of potent emotion out of the material, it not only feels forced, but overly manipulative. The heart never feels earned, despite the best efforts of Evans and Simmons, resulting in a film that will leave audiences cold instead of warm and fuzzy. Red One is a dizzyingly disappointing holiday film that fails to entertain or remotely earn its place among the very best Christmas adventures. Despite having a fun concept and a stacked cast, this holiday film never comes together the way it clearly should. What could have been a delightful Christmas treat for audiences this holiday season instead turns out to be a lump of coal in their stockings. Simply put, this film deserves to be on the naughty list. For a movie centered around the festive season and attempts to drive home the importance of joy, there's very little on offer when it comes to the unnecessarily long 122 minutes of Red One. Less outright bad than it is bland, which can often be worse. Jake Kasdan's potential-filled holiday actioner creates a fun world, but fails to inject it with much purpose or intention, leaving the family market likely to be scratching their head as to who this is exactly catered for. Penned by Chris Morgan, who's no stranger to the action genre, with a slew of the latter Fast and Furious sequels to his name, he's responsible for number 3 through 8, as well as the Dwayne Johnson's spin-off Hobbs and Shaw. Red One hits a lot of genre cliches throughout, as the aforementioned Johnson's hulking Callum Drift is on the cusp of retirement as Santa Claus's bodyguard and sees this Christmas as his send-off. The chap doesn't see the joy in Christmas anymore. But good old St. Nick, J.K. Simmons, considerably buff but underutilized, wants him to have more faith. Of course, Santa getting kidnapped doesn't help matters, and purely out of devotion to both he and Mrs. Claus, Bonnie Hunt, Callum sets off to find out who's responsible, looking to perennial naughty lister Jack O'Malley, Chris Evans, as the culprit. Jack was burned as a kid when he found out Santa wasn't real, so as an adult he's not buying what Callum is selling when he lets him in on the situation. It's believed bounty hunter Jack inadvertently gave away the coordinates of the North Pole to the film's villain, so of course we know that this Scrooge will have his spirit reinvigorated by the time this is all wrapped up. Of course, to get to that point, we have to go through a variety of standard action sequences. Overt CGI, Lucy Liu sadly having little to do as Callum's boss, Christopher Hivju and Kiernan Shipka making the most of their material as the hammy villains, Krampus and Witch Gryla, respectively, and Jake reconnecting with his neglected son. It's not like we haven't seen a variety, if not all, of these story beats in other films before, but here there's just such little effort exercised to even try and alter the familiar that it all just becomes a flush of predictability that isn't even saved by its usually reliable, charm-heavy cast. There's a modicum of poignancy by the film's end, at least, and it's all so inoffensive that the family crowd may find it easy viewing, even if the action, comedy, and holiday aspects never quite sit cohesively with one another. Ultimately, Red One is sadly not the next Christmas classic in waiting, and its November release might even mean by the time Christmas comes around it'll be forgotten, but in an uneventful week of cinema, i.e., before we have Gladiator and Wicked unleashed on our screens, it may find the crowd that would have happily lapped this up on Netflix and streamed it beyond recognition. A world-building franchise starter, there is still something so innately watchable about Red One. There are laughs to be had intentional, like Evans's constant befuddlement at all the holiday mayhem, to unintentional like anytime Johnson opens his mouth to deliver the most outlandish position you'll ever hear in a Christmas movie. The world building is interesting and creative. Simmons' Jacked Santa fits perfectly into a holiday action-adventure movie starring Johnson as bizarre as the concept of a militarized North Pole is. Especially in a kid's movie, it does make the movie feel at least a bit more memorable. However, Red One never seems too interested in diving deeper into any of the more interesting concepts, and instead is more focused on slaps to comedy and the buddy cop dynamic between Johnson and Evans. Perhaps the movie's biggest highlight is when Cow and Jack visit Krampus' hidden fortress. While most of the movie's CGI backgrounds and character designers range from noticeable to uncanny valley, this is the one sequence in the movie that relies more on practical makeup for its characters. And it's truly great. The Krampus design, for as uncomfortably horny as it is certainly different than any other incarnations of the character. The designs of the feeders feel like the one time the movie dared to be more creative in its visuals. Johnson is playing the same kind of character he typically plays in his blockbuster movies as the confident and often cocky straight man. It works. It's not a poor performance in any way, but it isn't particularly memorable either. Unlike something akin to Central Intelligence in Jumanji, the next level where he dares to let his goofy side shine, he never really allows himself to go all in on the silliness. For as much as it is easy to lament that Evans is in desperate need of a new agent, he does bring a lot of charm to Jack. The character starts similarly to his character in Knives Out. And while Evans will always be remembered for playing the noble do-gooder Steve Rogers, he has always shined at playing pricks. He allows himself to be dopey and oish, even if it's not entirely believable that a binge-drinking oish hacker would look like Captain America. Everyone else is pretty much sidelined. L's sole purpose in Red One is to stand in corners and deliver more exposition Shipka feels. Entirely MG'd as the villainous Grala, a character who we're told has a layered backstory, yet we never hear much of it. Simmons does prove to be perfectly cast as a more tough and badass Santa Claus. But after the movie reaches the 20-minute point, he is not given much more to do. Red One isn't a terrible movie. It's just also not a movie that you need to rush out and see on the big screen. However, if you do choose to wait for the film's arrival on Prime Video, there's a chance it'll be able to deliver at least a little bit of Christmas spirit. At least until you remember that this film cost over $200. Million more details, the heroes of Red One, a glittering lump of U-Tide action. Comedy coal coming to a multiplex near you. Travel the world via secret portals hidden in the back of toy stores, to which any child in the audience might ask, wait, there are stores that only sell toys. Well, not anymore, Timmy. Such brick and mortar establishments have largely been wiped out by Amazon, a.k.a. the mega corporation that bankrolled this movie. To see the company build the lore of a would-be blockbuster around a business model it destroyed is about as jing as, say, Netflix making a sitcom about Blockbuster. Speaking of the streaming giant, Red One is not a sequel to Red. Notice, though, it does share a star and a general air of crass commercial indifference with that algorithmic slop. There's something distinctly Bezo about its vision of the most wonderful time of the year. Santa Claus, as played by an unfathomably overqualified J.K. Simmons, is a rise and grind mogul who hits the gym before climbing onto the sleigh and runs his operation with an efficiency that could put a twinkle in every billionaire's eye. Early on, the movie touches down in the North Pole, and the place has all the dreamy enchantment of a fulfillment center. The elves, we're told, work 364 days a year, taking only December 26th off, like their counterparts at Amazon. They could use a better contract at 2 sizes too small. Heart, this is a buddy comedy, unboxing and pairing off a couple of stock action figures after Santa is kidnapped by Nordic wit Gila Kieran Shipka to save Christmas, the big guy's 300-year-old head of security, Callum Drift. Dwayne Johnson must join forces with Jack Ali. Chris Evans, a slovenly, cynical hacker and deadbeat dad. Do I look human? Drift at one point rhetorically asks his mismatched partner, and even ignoring his iconic cartoon physique. The answer is, once again, no defaulting to a stony, humorless glower. The Rock is all plastic. Machismo here that leaves Evans to pick up the comic slack, which he does with a smidge more New York attitude and posos, then strictly required, of course, going above and beyond material. This shoddy is no great lift, Mostly his performance leaves behind a warm and fuzzy gratitude that Ryan Reynolds wasn't available. Imagine a holiday season answer to Men in Black with more acronyms than jokes when new Monty director Jake Kasdan isn't introducing some new wrinkle in the mythological intelligence agency run by a poker-faced Lucy Liu. He's bombarding us with gaudy attractions. The CGI stocking stuffers include a trio of malevolent snowmen, a Hot Wheels car magically scaled up to full-size Lamborghini proportions, and a talking polar bear with no personality. The effects have a garish inconsistency. Familiar to the age of blockbuster crunch, to subject your eyes to them is to feel pangs of sympathy for the overworked, non-unionized artists who presumably sacrificed a holiday or two to make a release date probably set in stone before the script was written as spectacle. Red One is sub-Marvel A, further degradation of that assembly line entertainment model. The characters speak in canned witticisms. Use your words. One says when another is speechless, I'm right here. He retorts when they're talking about him as though he's not. There was a single scene shot on an actual set. The whole movie is lit, like a digital fireplace bathing the actors in a chintzy synthetic glow. The action scenes, like the one where Santa gets nabbed and Drift takes pursuit across the screensaver landscape of the North Pole, are dark, choppy, and weightless for an upcharge. Families can experience these joyless amusement park rides through the immersive magic of D-Box or 4DX. You'll really believe you're watching the film in a drafty theater during a blizzard while unruly children kick the back of your seat. There's exactly one inspired sequence in Red One. It's the stretch where Drift and O'Malley fall into the clutches of Santa's estranged, sadistic demon brother Krampus, who's played by Games of Thrones scene stealer Christopher Hibbu. The fun is all in the Norwegian character actors. Buoyant performance. The arrogant theatricality he projects beneath his elaborate prosthetics here and only here. Does Red One feel like it's even reaching for a gag rather than trying and failing to coast toward laughs on the back of its premise? If the mere thought of Santa needing a bodyguard doesn't leave you in stitches, it's going to be a chilly couple hours. Imagine a holiday season answer to Men in Black. With more acronyms than jokes, what's downright insulting about Red One is its ensign feigning towards some sort of celebration of the purity of childhood. We work for the kids, Santa tells Drift, who's mulling retirement and can no longer see past the cruelty and greed of their parents. That thesis, a sentimental ode to the true Christmas spirit, is pretty rich, coming from such a crass, noisy holiday distraction with no greater ambition than shaking a few extra dollars from the pockets of families looking to kill some time on winter vacation. Were this movie a toy you'd find on a shelf? Or let's be real, an Amazon wish list. It'd be the kind of trinket that's expensive in price, cheap in construction, and destined for a spot on the landfill. Red One is a heartily humored and stunningly visualized Christmas flick, but it's sorely lacking everywhere else in a world where a multilateral treaty between humans and mythological beings like elves and abominable snowmen is needed to cow violence. There exists the Mythological Oversight and Restoration Authority. He, to ensure peace, Red specifically follows Callum Drift, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the discouraged head commander of Santa Claus's J.K. Simmons, if the Enforcement, Logistics, and Fortification Division of MRA, having expressed this as his last Christmas run before retiring, it also becomes his most eventful. Santa gets kidnapped by a mysterious Black Ops team at the North Pole complex on Christmas Eve. He reports the kidnapping to his superior director, Zoe Harlow Lucy. Lou, whose team discovers Santa's location was leaked by a mercenary white hat hacker, Jack Ali. Chris Evans, upon catching and pressing the hacker. O'Malley admits he had no clue what he was linking or who to, just an anonymous information exchange. With his help, the trio and Polar Bear goes after Santa and his kidnapper, the Snowy Winter, which Gwa, Kier, and Shipka and Chaos Andis. It's up to them to save Santa and Christmas. Before kids wake up present-less, there's not much to say quality-wise about Red One, because there's not much happens. The film runs over time on plot, hoping to disguise otherwise hammy. At best cringy, at worst on-liners, and hollow attempts at characterization. The visuals are colorfully joyful, even if some creatures don't look right. There's always the badass polar bear agent, Garcia Raldo Fabro, and the acting all around is buoyant enough, but there's little intent beyond an otherwise cardboard generic plot about how good O Christmas spirit and a lot of action inspires hope. Of course, Christmas is saved. Of course, people rediscover their purposes. Of course, everything is happy. Red stakes are just greener than it intended. Random character developments get tossed about, too. Like when Amal's estranged son, Dylan Wesley Kimmel, is suddenly brought in. There's little not thin mention of him or their relationship beforehand. Thus, Red One is dumb fun, where you can turn your brain off and see some cool action, romance, and comedy, but not much else for those. Looking for that mindless occupation, Red One may warm your cheeks. There's nothing else on offer. Extra information: the new holiday film Red One, directed by Jake Kasdan, is in theaters starring Dwayne Johnson, Lucy Liu, J.K. Simmons, and Chris Evans. If you're in the mood for action-packed holiday excitement, this might be the movie for you. Red One kicks off with Santa Claus being kidnapped, throwing the mythical world into chaos, with only a day left until Christmas and his first day of retirement. Santa's bodyguard Cal is on a mission to track him down before Christmas spirit and goodwill are lost. To do this, he reluctantly teams up with Jacko Ali, a bounty hunter from the naughty list, and together they set out on a race against time to save Santa. When it comes to holiday movies, we know what to expect in terms of themes and story structure, especially in the action-adventure. 4 comedy genres, Red One comfortably blends these things together, delivering a buddy cop-style holiday adventure cow. Santa's bodyguard, played by Dwayne Johnson, has grown, jaded by the nastiness of adults, which has left him feeling disconnected from the holiday spirit. He's on the verge of retirement when Santa goes missing, and Cows is thrown into one last mission that reminds him goodness can often be buried, but is never truly lost given these themes. I think this film really is for an older audience or an adult audience that needs some Christmas cheer. Dwayne Johnson as Cal is the heart of this movie. He balances toughness with sensitivity, making his character feel like a true protector of Christmas. He brings such energy to the role that you wish Cal were real, just to have him as Santa's bodyguard. Chris Evans as Jacko. Ali is hilarious as the naughty list bounty hunter and bad dad. His chemistry with Dwayne Johnson makes for a fantastic on-screen partnership. Lucy Liu as Zoe is outstanding. She's especially good as the non-nonsense director of Mora, the organization that oversees mythical beings. J.K. Simmons as Santa brings warmth and wisdom to the story. He's not the typical holly-jolly Santa. Instead, he's fit, agile, and has a thoughtful presence that balances the film's characters. Red One does an excellent job of capturing the spirit of Christmas. Every scene is infused with festive atmosphere, from the tradition, holiday tropes, to the mythical elements that feel familiar yet fresh. The world-building in this film is impressive, creating a vibrant mythological world that coexists with the everyday world. The film imagines a structure for mythological beings and their society, grounding these elements in a way that feels believable. The world of Red One would be a fantastic base for a holiday-themed franchise, with its well-crafted mythological universe and the unique twist of mixing high-tech action with Christmas magic. This film sets up endless possibilities for future films centered around other mythical beings and holidays, from Valentine's Day to Easter, Halloween, and more. There's so much room for creative expansion that this could become a viable holiday franchise that brings fresh and fun new perspectives to traditional celebrations. One of the movie's most heartwarming messages comes from Santa himself, who emphasizes that our lives are shaped by the small choices we make every day. Santa's wisdom underscores that real change doesn't come from one big leap, but from small steps taken over time. This philosophy, woven throughout the film, highlights that even those on the naughty list have the potential to make choices that lead them toward better versions of themselves. One of the film's most interesting elements is its portrayal of complex villains who don't see themselves as bad guys. Instead, they believe they're improving the world, even if their actions seem misguided to others and actually are harming. These villains provide nuance to what would otherwise be a very predictable and rote story by adding a thought-provoking twist, showing how villains can see themselves as the heroes of their own stories, which again isn't a new thing, but they do it in a fun way. While Red One follows a familiar formulaic structure, it's well executed, we know the beats, and they play out like clockwork, which does come off as predictable for viewers who crave originality. This film may feel like a blend of holiday stories we've seen before, yet it's important to remember that holiday movies are often less about innovation and more about rekindling familiar feelings. And while I have seen every holiday movie under the sun, it is likely that younger audiences will find it fresh and new, since Red One sprinkles in some surprises that are a lot of fun. However, there is one enormous unanswered question: whatever happened to Aeon AEL? What I loved most was a huge surprise: the technology. Yes, Red One, actually. Infuses futuristic technology and magic together in such a way that it feels plausible and normal in this world. It incorporates ideas like seismic mapping, quantum fields, and AI to explain how the mythical world hides from humans. There's even a bit of science fiction, as Santa's team uses wormholes and quantum jumps to deliver gifts and to move around the world quickly. This blend of science and magic enhances the believability of the mythological world in fun and funny ways. Overall, Red One is a fun, action-packed holiday movie that brings warmth, excitement, and Christmas cheer to the big screen. And while I am admittedly easier to please when it comes to holiday films, this one really was good. I laughed a lot because it doesn't pretend to be anything more than a feel-good adventure. There is some swearing in the film, so it might not be a fit for little kids, but it's definitely the kind of movie you can enjoy with family, friends, or even solo if you're looking for a holiday pick-me-up. I think there's a good chance that it'll also become a seasonal favorite, which means that Red One is definitely worth the ticket. I'd recommend catching it in a Dolby or IMAX theater. The energy, colors, and festive atmosphere are fantastic on the big screen. Some Christmas films are designed as family-friendly romps that can be enjoyed by all as a holiday confection. Perfect example, A Christmas Story. Others are adult-oriented fare that might make the Grinch blush. Perfect example, Bad Santa. Then there's something like Red One, a hybrid that doesn't quite fit into either category. It's too violent and profane, frequent use of the word for younger kids, and too juvenile for adults outside of a clever reinvention of how the North Pole works. Red One doesn't do a lot right, which is surprising considering that the project Rhett team's director Jake Kasdan and actor Dwayne Johnson, who made the thoroughly enjoyable Jumanji. Welcome to the Jungle. Let's start with the length. At a shade over 2 hours long, Red One is carrying at least 20 minutes. Too much weight? There are times when it noticeably drags. That might not have been the case had the action scenes been exciting or Cora with greater precision. Instead, they're muddled, chaotic, and entirely predictable. Then there's the overall tone. Both of Kasdan's Jumanji movies had a tongue-in-cheek perkiness that kept the audience amused, even when other elements didn't quite work. Red One, however, wallows in sentimental twaddle and rarely remembers that a little comedy might be a good thing. The best thing in the movie, perhaps unsurprisingly, is J.K. Simmons. As Santa, I'd pay to watch a whole movie with him in this role. But it's not Red One to say he appears sparingly is kind. He's in it for a few scenes in the early going and a few scenes toward the end. And that's pretty much it for most of the movie. He's lying unconscious while the diabolical villain, the witch Gra, Kieran Shipka, siphons off his mystical Santa energy so she can imprison all the kids on the naughty list in magical snow. Globe's her #1 ally in this kidnap MSU Santa escapade is St. Nick's estranged adopted brother Krampus Christopher Hippu, working to retrieve Kris Kringle before Christmas Eve passes, are members of MRA, Mythological Oversight and Restoration Authority, and agency overseen by Zoe Harlow, Lucy Liu, Callum Drift, Dwayne Johnson, the commander of Santa's Enforcement Logistics and Fortification Team, and Jack Ali, Chris Evans, a cynical hacker who inadvertently collaborated with the enemy. Although the movie as a whole is a swing and miss, there is some inventive world-building. CDN and screenwriter Chris Morgan create a universe in which mythological creatures are real, but whose existence is managed and kept secret by MRA operation at the North Pole. Mix magic and technology, and Santa's Christmas Eve run, which is presented in some detail, is a delightful mix of old-school material and sci-fi. Elements that sequence is great fun and deserves to be preserved as some sort of short with the rest of the movie sheared off and jettison Chris Evans, continuing to do his best to distance himself from hype. His role as Steve Rogers' Captain America, he reminds me of Sean Connery post Diamonds Are Forever adopts a PG-13 version of the persona he embraced in Knives Out. He has a great early scene in which he dissects the flaws in a school mishap involving his son Dylan Wesley, Kimmel, and he generally brings a rambunctious quality to the proceedings. Dwayne Johnson, on the other hand, mostly appears bored and spends a lot of the movie going through the motions. He was allegedly paid $50 million for his participation. Callum's existential struggles. He has lost his faith in humanity's innate niceness, resulting in his decision to resign his post might have worked better with a different performer. Johnson does many things exceedingly well, but deep dramatic acting hasn't yet been shown to be among them. One could make a compelling case that Die Hard feels more Christmas-ish than Red One. And that's not a good sign for a movie being marketed as a Christmas film, which Die Hard released in the sweltering heat of July never was. Every year, it seems there's at least one high-profile film released in mid-November that wants to be seen as a holiday classic in waiting. Most of these titles end up justifiably forgotten. It's hard to argue that Red One won't be the next in this long line of pre-Thanksgiving turkeys. This film, directed by Jake, Kasdan, screenplay by Chris Morgan, story by Hiram Garcia, produced by Hiram Garcia, Dwayne Johnson, Dany Garcia, Chris Morgan, Jake Kasdan, Melvin Ah starring Dwayne Johnson, Chris Evans, Lucy Liu, J.K. Simmons, cinematography, Dan Mindel, edited by Mark H.R. Steve Edwards, Terrara Temponi, music by Henry Jackman, production companies, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, 7 Bucks Productions, distributed by Amazon MGM Studios, United States, Warner Brothers Pictures. International release states November 6, 2024 in United Kingdom, November 15th, 2024 in United States, running time 123 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $250 million, box office $31.5 million. So guys, this is the review of Red One movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.